Good day, mates and fellow adventurers. My name is Mordecai. Welcome back to this remote research facility from which I narrate various RPG horror stories for considerations for the table. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking inspiration from a historical figure when creating a character. To use a historical figure as a brief inspiration for creating a character, if you want to take inspiration from Leonardo da Vinci, we would most likely create a highly intelligent character who likes to invent various devices and create concepts that the world may take further inspiration from in the future. That sounds like an exciting concept, and the player who created that character would have a lot of fun whilst the campaign is running. However, in the wrong situation, that character can instead cause a number of rather serious problems, which could accumulate and result in a dead campaign. And one of the many potential wrong situations is if that DaVinci-inspired character was employed as a dreaded DMPC by a GM. So let's see just how disastrous this recipe was for the players in today's story. Before we begin with the story, if you like my content and want to help support the channel, be sure to subscribe and maybe give the video a like. Every bit of support is highly appreciated. Thank you sincerely, and with that, we shall get on to reading the story. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPG-Horror-Stories. Today's narrative is titled The DaVinci DMPC and the Disappointing Demise, and is written by user ThrowAW For context, I started playing D&D around 2 years ago. This was my first game, and I only later realised just how weird the entire situation was. I apologise in advance for my subpar grammar skills. My friend group and I started our first D&D game online. Before playing, we were given pages of lore and maps for the DM's homebrew, so I was incredibly excited. I was even more excited when I was allowed to play as an Aarakocra, on the condition that the flying ability was nerfed. To remedy this, I played as an elderly diplomatic bard with a significant arthritis problem. After the reading, picking hometowns, backstory interviews, and sorting out the Discord server, we were ready and pumped for our adventure to begin. The first session was amazing. Everyone was making memes about the game's events, and excitedly theorising about what would happen next. A few days before the second session, however, the DM mentioned that she loves playing DMPCs because she likes being able to interact with her world, but knows that most people hate them. We had no other experience and assumed that the DMPC would be just somewhat of a helpful PC, giving us lore and hints when we needed it, so we suggested making one, if it would improve her experience. We were introduced to the Artificer at the start of session 2, when she literally fell out of the sky with a failed pair of homemade DaVinci-style wings. Hilarity ensued. After some funny roleplay involving alcohol and a high painting roll, we headed to our first dungeon. We were sent to take down an assassin hideout that had been terrorizing the town, and it was a tough dungeon. The DM had to put her dice in the dice jail multiple times due to the enemy's insanely high rolls and our abysmal dice attempts, to the point that we got her to roll our health potions for us as we lost trust in our own rolls. I got knocked out twice and still hit things more often than the barbarian, the cleric, and our monk. However, we struggled through and got some awesome lore and plot hooks for our troubles. We then went on to discover a room that shot us with a ray of cold damage whenever we tried to enter, which was our first puzzle. For about half an hour, we did everything we could to try to figure out the solution to the puzzle and get the magic item that must be there, so tantalizingly close. We threw inanimate objects in. Nothing. We chucked a corpse in there. Nothing. We stepped in and out in different ways, under the effects of various spells, but slowly our health kept getting chipped away. We looked around all of the other rooms, but they were empty of anything that could be useful. I eventually used one of my last spell slots to cast Detect Magic, finding that the magic item that was shooting at us was behind a wall. Stumped, I decided to ask our mechanically knowledgeable DMPC if she had any thoughts. She had been completely silent for the entire dungeon, apart from providing a light source and helping out with some of the combat. It turns out, the answer was to get her to shoot the wall with an explosive gun thing that she had made. Disappointing that we spent that long trying to work out the puzzle for so long without her saying anything, but fine, we had other things to do in the dungeon. It turns out that discovering that magic item spelled the end of our bad luck for the session. We were incredibly concerned about the impending boss fight, being very beat up and running out of spells. However, we pushed on, as we could not rest in the dungeon, and leaving the crawl unfinished would have potentially massive consequences for the town. Apparently, whatever sin we had committed that caused the dice gods to rain destruction upon our heads had been appeased, for our weapons hit true, and we completed the fight triumphantly and with much rejoicing. And that was where the second session ended. As any good adventuring party would do, we proceeded to loot the place. In doing so, we found evidence that the mayor might be working with the cult that had been hiring the assassins. We then ran after the DMPC, who had left in a hurry after one of the cultists that was hanging out in the assassin's hideout had said something plot relevant to her. Upon returning to the town, we realized that the DMPC's house had been attacked, and their family had been kidnapped by the cult. And so we agreed to do our best to find them. The DMPC dramatically activated some golems to protect their house while we were out, and everyone found this pretty cool. We started looking for clues and found that our NPC companion, a non-verbal traumatized orphan, long story, had turned himself invisible and somehow escaped the raid. A cultist assassin then tried to attack the orphan, hinting that he was important somehow. We managed to distract the assassin long enough for the DMPC to sneak up behind him and put a gun to his head. Unfortunately, she was so traumatized by her family's disappearance that she had become even more silent. We struggled to stop her from blowing the man's brains out. After some fun with mind control spells and Aura of Truth on my part, the cleric got sick of the cultist dodging the questions, and threatened to use Spare the Dying to continually bring him back from the brink of death for unending torture whilst breaking his fingers. Q explaining to my newbie self that this is totally fine for a cleric of life to do. Anyway, with the threat prompting the cultist to just hand over the information we had asked for, we decided to have a talk about what to do next. Deciding time was of the essence, we decided to go find DMPC's family instead of confronting the mayor, especially since the captain of the guard had been spectacularly unhelpful. He gave us a quest to clear out the dungeon, but couldn't spare any of the officers that he had under his jurisdiction because of all of the town's murders. So we didn't know if we could rely on his help. I did go out of my way to ask DMPC if she had anything to add to the discussion, being as she'd lived in the town her whole life, and we had arrived the night before. Unfortunately, she was still too traumatized to tell us anything. At the beginning of our last session, the DM told us that we were now being hunted, as the evil mayor somehow knew our faces. We decided to travel fast and skip sleeping. Eventually, we were at too much of a disadvantage from exhaustion to carry on, and risked a long rest. The cult, at this point, had sent a group of high-level assassins after our low-level party, and obviously they were able to roll high enough stealth checks to immediately kill all of us in our sleep. Minus the barbarian who, realizing he was outnumbered, fell on his own weapon to not give our attackers the satisfaction of killing him. This was a total party wipe. Post-game, the DM lamented the fact that she had spent so long creating the world, and now we couldn't play in it. We also expressed sadness as we were loving the game. I asked why she didn't give us a chance to fight back, or instead just get captured. To which she replied with, "The cult wanted you dead, and they are powerful. There would be no reason for them to not go all out." I asked why the DMPC didn't hint that the captain could be trusted. "Metagaming isn't fun," was the reply. "Your actions have consequences." I talked to my fellow players later, and unfortunately, we all agreed that the game just felt like following DMPC around and then getting punished for one mistake. It was disappointing since we poured so much into crafting our characters and working with the DM to fit them into the world she had created. Luckily, I was able to find a group later that was more encompassing towards my playstyle, and I grew to love the game. I'm trying to learn how to be a dungeon master myself, but my arch nemesis includes scheduling issues and short notice dropouts, which have kept my one-shot in limbo for about 2 weeks up to this point. Oh well. I'm still friends with the DM, but I learned that sometimes people's playstyles just don't work together, and there is nothing wrong with dropping out of a game if it doesn't work for you, even if the DM is your close friend. If it's not for you, it's not for you, and that isn't a criticism of the DM. And that's where the story ends. Something that a lot of newer players can have trouble with is talking to the GM about issues with how they were running the game for the group. Sure, we have a new group of players, and the introduction and usage of a DMPC can seem like a good way to get the players engaged. That is, if your GM is unaware as to how that can cause significant problems. Now, I am not saying that a guiding DMPC is a bad idea for a GM to adopt, but I am saying that the reason why a lot of players hate the notion of the DMPC is because we have a lot of examples of DMPCs creating more problems than they solve. In addition to the potential railroading, which in this case caused the game to crash due to a mishandling of appropriate consequences, you then run the risk of removing player agency. Plus, there is a difference between having a guiding DMPC versus having a DMPC which drags the players in a given direction. Unfortunately, the DaVinci DMPC very much was the latter, being a literal self-insert made for the purposes of exploring the world the GM made. Plus, they also had a puzzle which relied on the DMPC in order to be solved. In other words, we had a GM who made a spotlight-hogging self-insert which had a major plot point revolving around said DMPC. And to top it off, was seemingly unaware as to why DMPCs are so often hated. All aboard the railroad train of irony so thick that it would jam a blender. There are some other issues that cropped up in the game, and some of these are indicative of a GM who has room to improve. Aspects like misunderstanding what metagaming is, a mishandling of how severe the consequences should be for a particular action, and the indirect railroading. For those who don't know, metagaming is the act of using out-of-character knowledge in order to gain an in-character advantage. An example of metagaming would be to have the party play through a pre-made module, and having one of the players read through the module, and then have their character mysteriously find every secret in the module. And here's how the GM mishandled the claim of metagaming. If the DMPC knew in character that the captain could be trusted, it is not metagaming to have the DMPC then tell the player characters that that captain can in fact be trusted. Let's now talk about the extreme severity of the consequences as a result of player actions. From the aftermath of the campaign, it seems pretty clear to me that the GM would have preferred to continue running the game, since everyone was having fun. For the purpose of this thought experiment, let's think about the situation. We have a cult who has a contact in the form of a corrupt mayor, and the party of characters have raided a location of significance. Now, sending assassins seems like a good idea on paper. until you realise that sending assassins will kill the game and party in equal measure. This is where we have to consider alternative consequences for the party's actions. Assuming that we want the cult to respond in force, maybe the cult sends a small group of low-level cultists to assess how much of a threat the party is to the cult's goals, with the expectation that the cult will need to reserve their muscle for if the party is an actual threat instead of a minor annoyance in the grand scheme. Or hey, maybe the cult can use their influence over the mayor to tarnish the party's fame, slowly turning the town against the party. Perhaps even put out a bounty in the bounty guild for the party on the grounds of intrusion. These alternatives would give the players time to properly react, whilst potentially preserving the integrity of the game. My last thoughts on the story are to do with the topics of playstyles and fair criticism. Whilst it is true that criticism can feel discouraging, fair criticism is often a great tool for learning how to improve, and can provide insight on where a playstyle needs some polish. Sitting down and having a reasonable discussion as a group with a GM about how the GM could improve at running the game in the future is a good start, although it may take some time for that improvement to show. In terms of playstyles, you can sometimes run into alternative playstyles that are completely jarring to that which can be considered ideal for a particular group, and you can always leave a game where such a conflict is occurring. However, sometimes by trying to work out the reasons why the conflict is there can be crucial in figuring out how to resolve those conflicts in future games. And that's why fair criticism in consideration of playstyles is important. It can act as a reflection on what's been happening, and how one can improve by sometimes taking a step backwards. Thank you for watching the video. If you like my content and want to see more or wish to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and maybe leave the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Again, thank you for watching, and I shall see you all next time.